In 1995, Outbreak hits theaters with a tense story of a lethal virus threatening to spread beyond control. A small town in California becomes the focus of two sides of the government, one trying to help and one trying to keep the virus and its origins a secret. What stands out to me is the depiction of the military response. The soldiers, for the most part, are outfitted in the appropriate gear. This attention to detail adds a sense of realism, which grounds the film's premise. This is the part we will be focusing on today, so join me as we take a look at Outbreak on Studio Surplus. Hello and welcome, I'm Jake, and today we're taking a look at the movie Outbreak. Now, Outbreak is a personal favorite of mine, and a movie that's been on my short list to make videos about for, I don't know, probably 15 years. I mean, I've been thinking about this for a long time. This predates any notion of the idea of surplus geek, or even me collecting surplus to the degree that I do nowadays. So I've been wanting to make this for a long time. So I'm excited to be talking about this movie today. I know other people wanted me to make this video as well. I've gotten requests for this specific movie. And as always, if you want to drop a comment down below and request a movie, by all means do. I can't get to everything, and there's certain things that I can't do yet because I'm missing pieces, and I gotta track down stuff, and it gets a little expensive, and this is a side hobby for me. I don't make money from this. So it's one of those things that if you do have a suggestion, I will look into it. I have a ton of movies on my list to do. And at the moment it's based on what can I do, what do I have, and what can I get to. So this is definitely one of those movies that I was really looking forward to talking about. And this video should have been made probably like 9 months ago, but things happen. And I'm just, again, excited to do it. There's so much consistency in the extras and all their kit and stuff. For the most part, across the board, they did a really good job. The attention to detail is really there. Is it the most accurate depiction of a military response to a biological threat? Debatable. Yeah, definitely debatable. I will say it's authentic, though. It feels real. It feels good. It feels grounded. They made some really good choices for the most part. And I think the movie works. I'm not going to argue on the science of the movie. That's for other people to do, and they have. But I think it's a great movie. So without further ado, we'll get into the first kit, which in this case is going to be centered around this gear kind of right here. It's when they first arrived to Africa in 1967, and it's a really cool kit. It might not be the most accurate, but it was a fun kit to break down. So let's get right into it. Okay, so starting from the top, we have the M25A1 gas mask. Now, this gas mask was specifically designed with tanks in mind. The filter has a coupling device that connects to the tank's filtration system. So in this case, not probably the most accurate choice, but it is unique looking mask and it works for what they're going for in the movie. And when it comes to the mask itself, there's a couple things to note. It's missing its exhale cover, and it's just not there. I didn't take it off for this purpose because they're usually taped on. And it looks like the microphone is chopped off. There's a microphone that right now is in the hood. I have it wrapped up into the hood, but it would come off the mask and hook up to your CVC helmet. And they looked like they just snipped it off, or maybe it was already removed before they even got their hands on it. And the other big feature that isn't actually a feature of the mask is the visor. In the movie, they must have slipped some sort of reflective material underneath the visor. Maybe my guess on why would be, obviously for filmmaking purposes, it gives them that shot. It also kind of keeps them, the audience, detached from them wearing the full gear, seeing the guys that are sick, because you never see the emotion, the human connection there. I think it's also a practical reason in that that's not Morgan Freeman and Donald Sutherland wearing those suits, or at least my guess would be that's not them. So instead of having to figure out, actors that look like them at a younger age, because this is, almost 30 years before the movie takes place, I think they went with that to kind of obscure, and, they do the voiceover work and stuff with the actors. So it's a cool thing, but that's me guessing, obviously, but I just threw a little bit of tinted material underneath just to kind of replicate that. It's not exactly what it looks like in the movie. You can tell it's definitely right up to the inside of the visors. There's no gap. In real life, you could, or in normal use, I should say, you can put an outsert on this gas mask. It connects to these two buttons on the side, and you would just, it snaps on, and then you could just take it off when you're wearing it when you're not in an environment that requires a tinted visor. They're using the M5 hood, which is the specific hood to be used with the M25 and M25A1. as opposed to the M7 hood, which was used with the M24 variant, which is just the helicopter variant of the M25. They're basically the same mask, just a different microphone adapter. Besides that, they're wearing the filter in kind of an odd position. The hose is at almost its maximum length, so you don't really have much movement. Usually you wouldn't wear it this low, and if you did, it would be worn with the M1 coupling device pointed out, so you could wrap the hose from the tank's filtration system and connect it. You wouldn't want it in that way. Usually it's either shoulder holstered, left in the carrier, and there's a little hole in the carrier that part sticks out, or like I said, that lower position, but it wouldn't be wrapped around the leg like this one is and how they had it in the movie. So kind of an odd choice, I guess, but I get it. It kind of looks cool. Again, I think they were going for looks on this more than anything. I will say at least this mask could have existed in that time, or did exist in terms of manufactured and being used. So at least it exists in that time frame. It's not some modern mask being used back in 1967 for the purposes of the film. So I'll give them credit for that. And I think that basically wraps up the mask and the hood and anything else I can think of. So we'll move on down to the body and talk about that next. Okay, so talking about what they're wearing. Now, they are wearing M3 coveralls, and these are specifically part of the Toxicological Agents Protective, or TAP, ensemble. And that was specifically made to be used in, highly toxic environments. It's kind of your OG hazmat gear in a way. And, it came out in the 50s, and it was used all the way up to the 90s, with some pieces of the ensemble being used well past that. The apron is still, I think, might still be used. But this is before like the modern hazmat suit existed, and which is usually an encapsulated suit, and you wear your air pack on the inside. This is typically worn with an M9A1 gas mask, with its own M3 hood, and that would be what you would see normally with it, not this M25 combo. So again, not really accurate to it. As far as the suit goes, it's a full rubber suit with an inner seal. The cuffs have double closures on them to get an even better seal, and zipper with buttons down the front, and then a cinching waist strap, which just gives you that much more. Trying to bring in that excess, because there's a lot of excess rubber on this, because it's kind of, they came in sizes, but you're kind of fitting a lot of different probably body types with just a few sizes. So they kind of went for maximum usability. This suit in particular is a 50s era. They would be in production all the way up through, I think the early 90s they were still making them. Maybe the 80s, and then they just continued using them into the 90s. There's not much changed between the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, so forth. They kind of just stay the same. Maybe the buttons, manufacturer changes, stuff like that, but the overall design stays the same. And typically you would wear either M3 or M4 TAP gloves with this. In the movie, they're just wearing latex gloves, probably some sort of modern variety for the time, and they have their cuffs taped around with duct tape. Typically, again, you'd wear purpose-built gloves for this, and kind of fine with that, because dexterity-wise, they show them they're going to take a blood sample. I don't know, you could probably do that with the TAP gloves on, but it would be more difficult. So I kind of get it. And also, I think in general, the suit that they're wearing for the response that to the thing that they're responding to, I think this is a little bit overkill. I think back in the 60s, they wouldn't have worn this. I mean, the TAP gear was really for specific roles. Again, toxic environments and decon. And then a lot of times they were worn when dealing with chemical munition storage or biological weapon storage. And that's where you'll see these suits being worn. So that's just one of those things. And going right into the boots, because it's all one piece, all the way down. You have closures at the bottom that snap around your boots. You're supposed to wear M2 or M2A1 TAP boots. There's just a tall rubber boot with a reinforced toe section. And I don't know what they're wearing in the movie, because they are wearing the proper M1 boot covers. And so you can't really see what boots they're wearing, but for sake of argument, they could be wearing the right boots. We'll just go with it. So they're almost wearing a complete TAP kit. Now, the M1 boot covers are just what it sounds like. It's just same rubber material, that you just wrap around the boot and then you just tie, shut as best as you can, and that's your protection for your feet. So it's a whole system. I do like that it's in the movie because you don't see the tap gear ever. It's rare that you actually get to see this tap gear being used in a movie. I would have preferred them using an M9 just because it would have been cool to see it like in the full ensemble being used. But again, it's fine. I think it still looks cool. I think the visor being reflective is pretty cool for a movie perspective. So I think they did a good job on this kit in terms of at least everything you see, maybe not the latex gloves, but everything else you see, you could see in use, would be in use in the time frame that the movie is taking place at this part of the movie. So at least all the gear is roughly correct. Yeah, the M25 could be a later production date, but at least the M25A1 existed in 1967, so it works. Tap gear existed, so forth and so on. So I think we're going to move on from this setup, and we're going to go over to Manny wearing a set of BDUs, and we're just going to talk about the basic setup of what everyone's wearing kind of when they're not in a, dangerous situation. So let's move on to that. Okay, so I have Manny here set up in a standard bare bones, just BDU uniform, patrol cap setup, just nothing really special about it. Most of the characters at some point in the movie are wearing their BDUs, and if they're outside, they're wearing a cap, they're wearing a cover. So kind of needed to go over it. It also just kind of establishes kind of the bare essentials here. Okay, so while editing this video, I realized I made a mistake and I really can't go back and re-record it. So in this part, I talk about the patrol caps and I say they are wearing hot weather caps, and unfortunately I was wrong about this. So we're just going to really quickly just go over the differences between the caps and then we'll move on. The main thing that gave it away in the movie was when I was looking at the side of the caps, I noticed that they didn't have any vent holes, and the hot weather cap has 2 vent holes on each side with 2 on the back. I will also point out that there is a seam on the front of the cap which is only present on the twill cap and is not present on the hot weather. So it's an extremely small detail, but I figured I'd point that out. So we will just fast forward past this part and just ignore that Manny's still wearing the hot weather cap, and we can move on. Moving down to the BDUs, I did go with hot weather BDUs. Now, these are second pattern, and I'll get into a second what makes it a second pattern. But again, some guys are probably wearing twill, some guys are probably wearing ripstop or hot weather. It's hard to tell based on the definition, the pixel quality. So I'm just using hot weathers as a stand-in or as like a general idea here. It doesn't have to be hot weather for every single guy, but this at least covers that. And the way you tell that it's a second pattern versus a first or a third, and that's kind of the broad. Some people use type. I like just using pattern, and then you kind of break the patterns down into their sub patterns. So in the case of first pattern, it only came in twill. When they introduced the second pattern, they eventually introduced a hot weather version of the second pattern, and that came in ripstop. And then in third pattern, it gets a little more complicated. But the first giveaway that it's a second pattern top is the collars. Gone is the longer, larger Elvis style collar. And I'll throw up an example next to it to show kind of the size difference. But they got rid of that. They went down to a smaller collar, maintained the smaller cuffs. One of the ways that you can tell that it's on a third pattern is on the third pattern, they went back to the older style of cuffs that's much, much wider. And again, I'll throw up an example of that on the screen. And then the other dead giveaways, when you see them walking away, you can make out that they have these waist adjustment tabs on the jackets. And this is only on the second pattern. These would be deleted on the third pattern. First pattern doesn't have them. So this is a clear-cut example of something that is a second pattern feature. And that makes it very easy to tell that you're dealing with a second pattern BDU. At least when it comes to the coat. When you get down to the trousers, it gets a little more complicated than that. Now, if they're ripstop, they have to be second or third because, again, first pattern didn't come in twill. The details in the trousers, I'm not even going to go over them right now. It's so minute. You're talking the waist adjustment tabs change. They get a little bit longer. Other than that, the trousers are kind of, there's not much of a difference. There's not enough to really make a big deal about. So that's pretty much all we're going to say for the trousers. They're pants. And getting down to the boots, again, as with every movie that I probably do, boots are always going to be a nightmare to figure out. I'm 90% certain that there's some form of Speedway's boot. Now, at that point in the mid-90s, you're talking, it could be first pattern or it could be second pattern, which had started coming out in the early 90s to replace the first pattern. Speedway's boots, or Stargate boots, I've heard them called. They were, they came into service in the mid-80s, really started to take over from the earlier Ripple style boots. By the late 80s, they really started becoming more common. You can't really tell if they're first or second because the only difference that you can physically tell on the outside of the boot is the last 2 row of speed lace is replaced with standard lace eyelets. And that's the only difference. Second pattern, they got rid of the last 2 speed lace. So that way, because you don't really need them. And I'll throw up an image with the differences. But I'm pretty sure they're speed lace because you can kind of see their soles. And the pattern's very specific. But before we move on to the MOPP 4 setup, and then the next setup after that, the one extra thing that I don't have examples for is some of them are wearing holsters. You do see General Ford is wearing a general officer's belt with a holster. They're kind of expensive. I wasn't going to just buy it for this, and I don't really have a reason to buy it in the first place, so I'm just not going to unless I find one for a good price. But you see in the movie, he's wearing that. Colonel Briggs, who's played by the legendary Dale Dye, he's wearing what I think is a Bianchi M13 chest harness shoulder holster. I think that's the model, or something in that. It looks like it's that... It's a chest harness that's compatible with, the UM84 and the UM92 holsters. And that's what it seems like he's wearing. Beyond the belts and the holsters and all that stuff that you see the guys wearing, some of the main characters wearing, I did want to point out one small thing. I'm not going to set it up on here because it'd be a hassle, but you do see the soldiers who are on the edge protecting what we would call nowadays the cold zone, going into the warm zone. In the movie, it would just been the outer perimeter. Those guys aren't wearing MOPP 4. They're not in their gear. They're actually at MOPP 0. And it's a kind of a nice little attention to detail thing where all the guys have butt packs on, and I'll get to that when I do the next setup with the Alice rig. But they all have butt packs on, and normally, especially in the 80s, you don't really see butt packs all the time. It's kind of a, depending on the situation, the unit and stuff. But in this case, I like that they included the butt pack because I'll throw up a screen. You can see that they have their booties, their overboots, and their BDUs, their bow dress overgarments, stuffed into the butt pack, and it's at the ready. And it's just a nice little attention to detail thing. And this movie, whatever your feelings are with the movie, I think it's a good movie. Maybe the science isn't great, but it has that attention to detail. And you're going to hear me say that a couple other times throughout this video because I like the attention to detail to things like that. So you see them they're ready to go. They're MOPP 0. It's at the ready. They can get into it as, within minutes. So it's just a nice little small detail. Okay, so that's the basic BDU setup. Again, it does come up a lot, so I wanted to cover kind of, some of these details. And obviously it's the patterns of BDU. I am going to do a video eventually breaking down kind of a guide to BDUs and the differences and stuff, but that's for a much later date. We're just move on over to the MOPP 4 setup and keep this going. Okay, so we finally made it to the part that I think most people clicked on this video for, which is the full breakdown of the MOPP 4 kit. And I have to admit that this is kind of, I probably said it earlier, but this is kind of my reason for picking this movie. I love this kit. It's kind of iconic in its own way. It's very standard. There's nothing crazy about this. There's nothing that's something that you wouldn't find in real life. I think that's part of it, is that it just feels so grounded. And again, the movie has its little faults, and there's little things here, and there's little nitpicks in this kit that I'll point out as we go here, but the consistency of, outfitting of good number of extras, because I didn't count it, but there's got to be 40, maybe even 50 guys sometimes on screen wearing this kit. Maybe it's 30. Maybe I'm overselling it, but there's still a lot of guys wearing the same kit, looking pretty good. and it works, and it sells this idea that this town is being controlled by the army, and it goes a long way. So I appreciate the hard work that they put into doing this and getting it fairly right. I mean, again, the nitpicks are gonna be small, minor things that I can, that you can kind of dispel a little bit and suspension of disbelief it, to get by. But we'll start off with the head and then work our way down. But I will say, you got to give me a little bit of a break on this one because there's a lot to cover here. It's all small things, but if I miss something, I apologize. I'm trying to encapsulate all the differences in kind of one setup. Otherwise, we'd be here for, a year. Okay, so starting off with the helmet first. There's two helmets that you see worn in the movie, although primarily there's one helmet you see the majority of the guys wearing, and that's a Pasget helmet. Now, whether or not it is a real surplus Pasget, I can't say for certain, but it's Pasget shaped, so we're going with it. All the Pasgets seem to have cat eye bands on them. Some of them have sunwind and dust goggles. The vast majority of those are the clear lens. There's probably a few tinted mixed in there, and then there's one laser protective lens mixed in there, and that is the guy guarding one of the two guards outside the laboratory that's set up right next to the hospital. And it's clear as day that he's wearing laser protective lenses, or lens. So that little detail, it's kind of a minor thing. The second helmet that you see is the guy sitting on the mocked up ITVs, which are just M114s, have CVC helmets, DH-132 CVC helmets. Whether or not they are the original DH-132 or A's, I can't say for certain. This is 1995, so that's really the only two variants you would have seen at that time. That would have been probably, acquirable by production. So it's one of those two variants, but there is a couple guys that you see in a couple different scenes wearing a CVC helmet. So that's just a minor little detail that I didn't want to forget. And I actually did forget it in a couple other takes. So this is, trying to cover my mistakes here a little bit. So moving on, the most prominent feature of this is the gas mask. Now, this is an M17A2, the specific one. In the film, there's a mix of probably all three variants of the M17. I say probably because you can't tell an A1 from A2 unless you can see inside the mask and see if it has the resuscitation tube, or the mouthpiece for that, or if you could see the date on it. Obviously, if it's 1971 dated and it has a drinking tube, you'd be able to tell, but you're not going to see that with the hood on. So, and you also see the original M17 with no drinking tube. They actually, probably 1/3 of the masks that you see are M17s and not A1 or A2s. So my guess, just that's what they could get their hands on. And that leads into, is the M17 correct for the time frame? It gets a little tricky here because 1992 is when the M40 begins to replace the M17. Whether or not by 95 it would have replaced it completely, I don't know. And although they were representing a active infantry unit, the 4th Infantry Division, I don't know if they would have had, someone that served might know better if they would have had them. I will say I don't fault the movie for it. Getting all those M40s at that specific moment in time would have basically been impossible. They wouldn't have been surplus yet. They were still being pushed out to units. That stuff is slow. I'm not sure when the initial operating capacity was supposed to be met, what year that was supposed to be, and when the Army expected to be at a level where they had enough of them. So I think the M17 is fine. I think from a look-wise, the M17 is an iconic-looking mask. It looks cool. I think it works for the film. It really takes the humanity away from each individual soldier while they're doing their task. So it's that gas mask goon trope. But in this case, they're not necessarily bad guys. They're just people doing a job. And I think it works for that. So they're all wearing the M6A2 hood. There might be a few M6 hoods mixed in there, but I didn't really check to see, and I kind of doubt it. They're less common. So besides that, pretty standard M17. Some of them have outserts on, some of them don't. Kind of a toss-up. Not much else to say about the M17 other than that, what I just said. But like I said, I like it. I think it's a good choice. I think it works. Moving on from the M17, we're going to go down to the uniform first, and then we'll get to web gear. They're wearing battle dress overgarment, or BDO. This is the chemical suit that was designed to replace the CPOG, which is the OD and sometimes woodland chemical suit that was introduced in the late 70s. And it's same concept as the CPOG. Doesn't have a hood. It's a charcoal infused foam basically on the inside. And yes, it does. They do leak like crazy. So if you do buy one, they will be. If it still has a charcoal in it, it's going to be everywhere. So be warned. And but it's got a different pocket arrangement from the CPOG. It's got the pockets face inward. They open up from the inside instead of being a Velcro open up like a normal pocket. And CPOGs are slightly canted in towards the center. These are straight up and down. It also has arm pockets. There's a top pocket and then a bottom pocket. Nothing too crazy here, but just a few more extra pockets on them. And then the trousers or the pants have a slightly different pocket. It's a button snap that is on the side. Actually, there's two button snaps, no Velcro, and then they're on the side versus the CPOG where you have your pockets on the front of the thigh for whatever reason that was. Besides that, nothing too crazy. BDO is a perfectly acceptable chemical suit to see in 1995. That would have been the Army's primary chemical suit. The CPOG would have been relegated to mostly training purposes by that point. It still would have been used, but would have been for training. BDO was still the primary suit. It hadn't yet been replaced by the later J-list, which would come around at the end of the 90s, but really the early 2000s when you start seeing those. So that's a perfectly acceptable chemical suit, and it's the right chemical suit. So to see them in that high numbers is pretty cool that they got that right. There might be a chance that there's a few CPOGs mixed in there, the woodland variant, but I couldn't tell from when I skimmed over, I couldn't see any. So I think they got all BDOs. So that's a pretty cool little detail. And again, it's that consistency of getting that many guys to be that similar, that same, is pretty impressive. As far as web gear goes, this is where it gets a little not difficult to talk about, but it's standard, but also there's a little bit of touches here changing up based on each individual soldier. Standard Alice layout, you have two mag pouches on both, one on the front left, one on the front right. Then you have two canteen pouches on the back. I went with a standard canteen cap on one and then a black M1 drinking adapter cap for the other. In the movie, there seems to be a mix. It's kind of hard to tell. Again, it's one of those details where they're passing by and you're freeze framing and trying to see, is that, what is that? What am I looking at? There could be some green adapter caps in there too, because they made them in both green and black. Again, trying to find that detail is difficult. And then they also have, I pointed this out already, but they all have butt packs. And again, the butt pack is a nice detail because it serves a purpose. It's not just, oh, it's butt pack, we're going to throw a butt pack on them. You see it when they're not in full MOPP 4. They're storing their chemical gear here. Now I have this full. In the movie, they're mostly empty. They're also mostly commercial or like a repro brand. There's a mix probably of legit U.S. surplus in there as well. But they all seem to be nylon. I don't think any are like M1961 or anything like that. So I only packed this one out just to give it a little bit of dimension to it, but most of them in them are empty because they're wearing all the stuff that they were storing them. Again, it's a nice little detail that I appreciate, and it works really good. Spinning around to the other side here, he does have a M7 bayonet in a M8A1 scabbard. Now, by this point, the M7 probably would not be that common. The M9 started to replace it in the mid to late 80s, kind of 87, 88, you start seeing them show up. So that would have been probably not correct for this time frame. You do see the guys using them for crowd control. They have them on their rifles. Again, I'm fine with this because trying to attain that number of M9 bayonets and their scabbards for the film probably just wasn't worth it. So it works. It doesn't really matter what bayonet you have in your rifle as far as crowd control goes. It's still pointy. It's still going to hurt. So I think it works. And then on some guys, I don't have it on this guy, but on some guys, you do have M12 holsters on the right side. It's a few of the guys are probably NCOs or officer kits that have those. Nothing too crazy, but I wanted to just make sure I covered that. Besides that, the Alice gear, that's pretty much everything that you see. There's not too much variation in the Alice gear other than really just the M12. And that's kind of the gist of it. The only thing that I almost forgot is the belts. I have a LC2 with the plastic quick release belt here. Now, in the movie, most of them have either this belt, this release mechanism, or they have the earlier ball and hook metal buckle. So either have this buckle or that buckle. I'm not sure if the metal buckle ones are LC1 or LC2. They did make them in both, or they did make both of them with that type, but I can't be certain without being able to see the waist adjustment tab. So just bear in mind that it's either going to be an LC1 or LC2 with the metal buckle, or it's an LC2 with the quick release gray buckle here. So just one small little detail that does change depending on the guy you're looking at. And again, total reasonable. Even by the 90s, you still will see metal buckles showing up. It's going to be a little bit less common by that point because these started to really come into their own in the mid to late 80s, but it's still not an insane thing to see. So it still works. And then the only other piece of kit that's gear related is the M15A1 carrier for the M17. It's just in a M17 carrier. There's not much more to say than that. There's probably a mix of different versions of it, or in more or less not versions, but markings. It's hard to tell. Most of them are faded. So there could be some earlier types mixed in there, but not much more in terms of web gear. That's pretty much the web gear covered. Now, before we move on to the boots, talk hands, I have a poorly taped glove onto this hand. They do have tape in the movies. The gloves in the movies are not USGI standard chemical gloves. At least it doesn't look like it. They are thicker gloves than like a latex glove. I couldn't figure out exactly, obviously. I mean, it probably was a glove that was being made at the time. Same problem as the latex gloves earlier. All I know is that it's some sort of rubber glove. Now, I have latex on here for demonstration or for the video. I can't get rubber gloves on these mannequin hands. It's not possible. But they have them taped. Whether or not taping would have been done, I don't know, because it's a very specific circumstance where you know what's going to happen. In combat, you wouldn't obviously tape. You don't get time for that. But in this instance, they know what they're going into. So the taping does kind of make sense. I kind of try to replicate it in the movie. If you look really close, the taping isn't that great either. Some of the guys have like a good 4 inches, 5 inches of tape just wrapped around their wrist. Whatever works, really, honestly. But so that's pretty much the gloves. We already talked about the BDO, so we'll skip the pants. There's not much more to go on for those. And then boots. They're probably wearing, obviously, first pattern speed lace boots, or second pattern, but they're wearing green vinyl over boots over them. And I feel like almost every single guy is wearing green vinyl over boots. I didn't see any black vinyl over boots, and I didn't see any chemical protective footwear covers. Besides that, there's not much more to the kit. I think most of the things that are wrong or kind of off, you can kind of, suspension of disbelief it away because it's not that bad. M17s were still kind of in service at the time, so it works. Everything else is pretty much spot on. So, they did what they could with what they got, and it works. So we got 2 more kits to look at, and then we can pretty much wrap this video up. So let's just keep it going. Okay, so now that we're done with the full MOPP 4 kit that all the soldiers are wearing, I wanted to move on real quick to a kind of side character who's only shown briefly. And, I mean, he might barely get 30 seconds of screen time, if that. And I'm not sure job-wise what you would say he is, but he's a sergeant, and he's kind of acting in an air traffic controller kind of, or ground controller kind of role. So he has kind of a unique kit. The base of the kit is pretty much the same as before as the previous soldiers. So it's a battle dress overgarment with green vinyl overboots. But it's the radio and how he has all configured and such is kind of the part that I wanted to focus on. So starting with his head, he's got the older style patrol cap, the non-hot weather version of it. And he's, depending on the scene, either has a H251/U headset on his ears or around his neck. And it's also a little damaged. You can actually see that like this panel here is unscrewed and just the wires are exposed. It is what it is. They got their hands on what they could. and he's got that directly hooked up to his radio. And then for microphone, he's got an M80/U hand microphone. And, kind of a unique setup. You don't see these that often. Usually you just see the standard handset, whatever version, depending on the year that you're looking at for reference. And we'll spin them back around here carefully to show the radio. Now, I have a PRC 77 on his back. In the movie, it's more than likely a 77. There is a chance that it's a 25. Externally, they're pretty much the same, and they both can be used on the same pack. So this is a ST-138, field radio pack, and pretty standard. Nothing too crazy about the radio itself. It's probably a 77. There's not much more to say than that. And then flipping her over to the side here, he does have a standard base with a flex whip antenna. Kind of ran through one of these D-rings, one of the strap securing rings on the carrier. So, nice little detail. I don't know, you do see this sometimes in photos. I don't know how effective this was, but I guess in his case, if he's working with helicopters, you don't really want to have your antenna sticking above your head just in case. You don't want to get it lopped off. So this does make sense from a practical standpoint. So it's kind of a nice little detail. And this is what I'm talking about with this setup is fairly well thought through. It's just one of those things where I appreciate the attention to detail. As far as the uniform goes, again, BDO, as I said earlier, he's got his collars on his BDUs sticking out though. So you can see his sergeant rank is sewn on. So you can see it's visible. He has his rank on his patrol cap as well, but it's a nice little detail because it's like when you're wearing your chemical suit, you can't see the rank anymore. Especially if so it helps to identify who he is. I'm not sure if they did that just for the movie purposes, or is that just someone realized that kind of makes sense, or at least to me it kind of makes sense. I could be completely off base. And he does have an armband. I don't have it here. He does have it basically just looks like just a simple armband, not military really per se, but just a simple white armband with something written on it. You don't really ever get a good look at it, so I didn't try to reproduce the setup, but just had to say it real quick and to cover it. And then basically you go down, you get the M15A1 carrier for the M17 gas mask, and then in the waist strap for it, there's an angle head flashlight hanging off, and then a pair of sun, wind, and dust goggles kind of slip through. And again, another nice little attention to detail with the goggles, because working with helicopters, dust gets kicked up. This does make a lot of sense. So it's a well thought through kit, and I just thought it was kind of neat, so I wanted to cover it real quick. So that's pretty much this kit. We'll move on to the last kit, and then we'll kind of wrap up this video with a few little details, and then that'll be it. Okay, so we're finally at the last kit for this movie, and we're going to be taking a look at the pilot kits of both the Huey pilots that are just, flying around the town, and also the Huey pilots that go after Colonel Daniels and Major Salt. And I just preface this, helicopter gear and the like are a little bit outside my knowledge base, so I did my best with this one. I had a hard time identifying the color of the gear. It could be either sage green or OD. It's very hard to tell, especially when they're in the helicopters. You never really get a full shot of them up close outside of the helicopters, so I did the best I can, and hopefully, if I get anything wrong, just comment down below. But moving on to the kit, we're going to start with the helmet. This is an SBH-4. This is the single visor type. You see in the movie, at least half the crews are always wearing an SBH-4. The other half wearing an SBH-5. I don't own an SBH-5, but you can tell it's more than likely an SBH-5 based on it's got the dual visor on top. The liner for the SBH-5 is all black. It's a little bit different than the standard liner. And there's a knob on the left side of the helmet, roughly around here, that is a detail that signifies that it's an SBH-5, or more than likely. But I think an SBH-5 could be an amalgamation of other helmets. Who knows? But basically just a standard, pilot's helicopter helmet. This would have been in use since the late 60s. The single visor helmet without the shroud for the MVG probably still would have been used. I mean, they're flying Hueys. They're flying older model Hueys in the movie, so you can kind of overlook it. but it is what it is, kind of thing. And then sometimes they have the visor down, sometimes they don't. So we'll move on from the helmet, but there's not much more to say other than it's an SPH4, and sure. All right, so as far as the body goes, I'm going to kind of do this like I did earlier with the tap gear. I'm just going to kind of go through it in one go because there's not much here and you can't see much. So as far as the flight suit goes, they're wearing a CW 27P flight suit in sage green. It could be OD green. Again, this is one of those, like I said before, I can't tell based on the movie. It's just the color is just not there. The detail is not there. So correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not sure if U.S. Army pilots would have been wearing the sage green one still in the 90s. My guess is yes, but they could have switched to the OD green one. As far as the vest goes, this is a CRU-21 survival vest. It's also in sage green. In the movie, that I can almost for sure say that they're wearing the sage green version. The Army adopted an OD green one in the 1980s. And they started to filter into units. But I again, not sure if you would see sage green ones still in use by pilots as late as the 90s. I don't know. But that's what they're wearing. As far as gloves, they're wearing your standard Nomex flight gloves. These are, pretty standard across the board for pilots. And they've been so since the 60s. I mean, these are great gloves. I used a pair when I was in for, ground stuff. It's just a good overall glove. You don't have to just wear it for flying. These are great gloves overall, and you can't beat them. And then as far as boots go, I can't tell. There's never a good shot. You can't really tell. So my guess is they're probably just wearing the same boots as everyone else. Probably just standard, combat leather boots. Probably the speed lace boots. They could be wearing flight boots, but honestly, I kind of doubt it. They're probably just wearing those boots. But I can't tell because you never see them really outside of the helicopter, or at least not in a good shot with enough detail to really tell. So that really, it's a simple kit. There's not much to it. I know this is feels fast, but there's not much to go over. They're just kind of there a lot. They play kind of a major part at certain pieces of the movie. But there's not much more to go over here. So that's pretty much it. We're just going to wrap this up real quick. There's a few little details I want to go over in the movie that didn't warrant a full kit, but were interesting side things that I wanted to mention. And then we'll just, we'll be done with the video. So let's move on to that. Okay, so we finally made it to the kind of extras kind of part of the video. And this is going to be covering kit and gear and vehicles and aircraft that, just little things that I thought was interesting or wanted to note, things that I couldn't acquire or just don't have access to, but still thought needed to be talked about. So I think the first thing is not really a kit or anything. It's just a unit. They did pick a unit for the soldiers to be a part of. Earlier in the movie, General McClintock names the 1st Battalion of the 8th Infantry, and they happen to be attached to the 4th Infantry Division, and you do see 4th ID patches throughout the film. On the pilots, on the MPs when they're wearing their armbands, which I couldn't find the exact armband, which is why I didn't cover that specifically. They kind of changed a lot over time, and trying to get the exact one, I just kind of gave up. There's so many the variations in those is insane, and it's not something that I specialize in, so I just kind of moved on. But those exist, and they have the 4th ID patch on it, so it narrows it down. Now, the 1st Battalion of the 8th Infantry is actually attached to the 4th Infantry at that time and still. So it's a nice little detail that kind of grounds the movie a little bit and gives kind of a something background detail. Just it doesn't matter that much, but it's cool. And again, it really in line with the consistency that they demonstrated with the MOPP gear and some other things. So I had to note that because I appreciate the attention to detail. Moving on from that, the other little thing, like infantry-wise, that we can bring up is the guys. There is guys who have dragons, M47 dragons set up, and you see that in the news report talking about what's going on with the town and stuff. And behind him is a bunch of dragons. There's at least 3 in that scene, and pointed inward. Terrifying prospect to have to use dragons on American citizens, but the fact that they actually got dragons, they upped the ante a little of the movie. They could have just had a bunch of dudes, standing there, but they went that extra mile and put a dragon in there. And I appreciate it too, because the dragon doesn't really get a lot of movie presence. I feel like it kind of just gets forgotten about when movies cover anything from like the late 70s all the way into the 90s. anytime. I mean, there's not a lot of movies that cover that time period specifically with war, but like, or the military, but the Dragon usually kind of just falls to the wayside. And it was a medium anti-tank weapon system for the U.S. Army and the Marines. It was a common weapon system. So despite the fact that it was okay in okayish hands, if you were an expert with it, you were pretty good, but the Dragon leaves a lot to be desired. It's still a nice little detail, and I appreciate it being in the back of the movie, or in the back of that scene, and that's the only time I think you see it. But we'll move on to the vehicles and aircraft, and then we're going to wrap this up. All right, so for vehicles and aircraft are concerned, there's only 2 vehicles. I'm going to cover a few of the helicopters, and I'm going to cover 2 vehicles. I'm not going to go crazy and cover all the Humvee variants, the M35s, the C-130 you see for 10 seconds, the E3 Sentry that I think is just stock footage, or the C-123 that is the bomber carrying the fuel air bomb. I'm just, or even the C-47 that carries the earlier fuel air bomb in Africa. We'll skip all that. None of that is in my opinion, is anything crazy or noteworthy. So as far as ground vehicles go, the first thing I want to talk about is the Gamma Goat. You see a Gamma Goat in a few scenes. It shows up very briefly. It's an interesting thing to see because by the 90s, I think all Gamma Goats would have been retired by that point. They were kind of considered a maintenance nightmare. They weren't really loved by the troops. Some guys loved them that were able to figure it out, but a lot of guys just did not enjoy driving a Gamma Goat or working at a Gamma Goat or being around a Gamma Goat. So is it cool seeing in the movie? Yeah. Would it be there normally? Probably not. But again, who cares? It's kind of cool. And it doesn't matter in the sense of the movie. The second vehicle that also would not be there and would have been retired long ago, and I don't even think the National Guard kept on to these, is the M114. You see at least 3. I think there's only 3 in the whole film, but there's 3 separate M114s. I think at least one of them is an A2. One is mocked up as an ITV, and then the other one I think is an A1 with a 50 cal mount. It's hard to tell. It could also be an A2 with a 20 mil or a 21 or 20 mil mount. But it's clearly standing in for M113s, and again, it works. I'm not criticizing using them. I think they're cool to see. You don't get to see the M114 often. Unfortunately, it's another one of those vehicles that never really lived up to its name or really to its job. It never really did a good job. It had issues. It had problems with maintenance, and it was retired and taken out of service really in the early 80s. So it didn't last too long. I will say it is cool that they took one and slapped on what I'm assuming is a mock-up of an ITV turret, the Hammerhead, and made a kind of an M901 looking thing to throw in the movie. And I do appreciate that little detail. I don't know if that was made for the movie or someone else had done that prior, and then when they rented that vehicle, it just happened to be that way. It was fun to see. I mean, anything tow related, I'm going to be happy to see. So that was a fun little added detail. So, there's not much more to talk about with the vehicle, so we'll move on from there. Okay, so for aircraft, again, kind of keeping this simple. You got UH-1B Hueys, or at least from what I've been able to find online, those are UH-1B Hueys. Again, just like any movie in this time frame, they wouldn't be Hueys. Hueys would have been long gone, especially the B. The B definitely wouldn't have been around. There's 3 of them. They do CGI and more, and one scene, I think they could have got away with just the 3, and it would have been fine. But I understand why they did it. They wanted to give it more scale. Movie making. I don't know. I'm not an expert. Moving on from the Hueys, because again, every movie in this time frame is going to have Hueys. It's whatever they had, they could rent is what they got. And, once they got DoD support, you're not seeing Blackhawks at that time. It's rare to see Blackhawks in most movies of that time frame, or even today, actually. But, so they did what they could with what they got. Now, moving on to the OH-6, or what I think is an MD-500, the commercial variant, mocked up as an OH-6. But for movie, for the purpose of the video, we'll just call it an OH-6. For the Loach, that one's weird. I don't think there'd be any Loaches in a active duty unit. At that point, I think the OH-58 had completely replaced OH-6s in active duty use, with the exception of the 160th. That's a completely different thing. Yeah, we're just going to ignore that. But they would have been OH-58s. That goes back to the 60s. They were trying to replace... They loved the Loach in the 60s, but then they I don't know, I don't know the whole history behind it, but they eventually decided to go back to the drawing board and accept the 206 as the OH-58. Now, the Bell 206 does show up in the film, oddly enough, in 1967 in Africa. This one is probably not correct, only because in 1967, the Bell 206A would have just been entering production. I think it was just adopted by the Army at that very moment. So there's no way that they would have had it. I think all the airframes that were being made were being sent right to Vietnam to be used in that scout role, or the hunter-killer teams with the Cobras, whatever they were being used for. But I don't think they would have made it to Africa. So it's just a little small detail. Again, it's a nitpick. I'm not blaming the movie. It is what it is. It was filmed in a completely different location from the California scenes, filmed in Hawaii. But it's a small little detail. They also later, when they go back to Africa with Colonel Daniels in the present day, they have a Long Ranger instead of the 206 Jet Ranger. Just an extended fuselage. Nothing crazy, but it's just interesting they had two different variants show up, because I think that was also filmed in Hawaii. So maybe they did that just to differentiate it from the earlier scene. Not really sure what the thought process on that was. Beyond that, though, it's really not much more to say about the aircraft. Like I said, I'm skipping all the C-123, the E-3, C-130. I'm skipping all that because none of that is really, to me, particularly noteworthy. So that's it for aircraft. So we'll just move on from here and end the video. Okay, so that was Outbreak. And there isn't much more I can add to it at this point. I think I've covered everything. I want to thank you for getting to this part of the video. And I also want to thank everyone who supports the channel. I do read the comments. I don't always have a chance to respond to them. I get pretty distracted pretty quickly, and then I'm off and doing something else. So, but I do read them. I do appreciate it. If you guys have suggestions, like I said earlier, drop them down below. I will try to get to them, or at least put them on my list. It's a very long list at this point for movies I'd like to cover. I'd also like to cover video games and TV shows. Video games gets a little bit more complicated because there's a lot of times there's even more stuff to cover in video games because you can really break down every little detail. With that being said, though, I am going to try to make more content. I apologize for being so delayed on this video. This video was supposed to be made and released in July and then September, and now we're in October. And I also had a video that I was working on in January of last year that would have followed up pretty quickly from the previous video. And then I ran into every problem you can think of, camera issues, footage being corrupted, Ken's leg broke, his stand just decided it was not poor construction quality, and I had to build him a new leg. So it's, yeah, the things that pop up, and I'm not gonna lie, kind of demoralized me a little bit, so I just never got around to making more content. So if you want to follow me a little bit closer in terms of content, I do have an Instagram, and I do have a X, or Twitter, what do you want to call it. I'm not really a big fan of X, but I do like the community that's built in, or not built in, but that exists there for military surplus and militaria. So I kind of just stick to that corner of the internet, and I don't go anywhere else. And I pray that it stays sane there. But, Instagram, I post on my stories. Once in a while, I'll post a post about stuff. I'm going to try to up that up a little bit, but we'll see. I have a few videos, and by a few, I mean like 5 videos that are in the pipeline that I'm scripting, researching, acquiring when I need to do them, and I'm hoping to increase my content, how much content I put out there. So hopefully soon I'll have more videos for you guys. I also want to do an update video or like a state of the channel video because I have been gone for so long to kind of bring you guys up to speed. Also, again, apologize for being so delayed. And there's a couple announcements baked in there as well. But besides that, that's pretty much it. That's it for the video. So as always, thanks for watching.